My name is Clara Bennett, and last week, I faced a choice that no parent should ever have to make: family loyalty or my daughter's safety. One decision, and it tore the fragile piece I'd been holding together for years straight in half. It forced me to confront a truth I'd buried since childhood, the one I never wanted to see. If you've ever had to stand up to toxic family members to protect someone you love, hit subscribe now. This story is for you. Because sometimes the people who are supposed to care the most are the ones who hurt the deepest, and recognizing it can save a life, or at least a little girl's innocence. I'm 32, a single mother, and a regional sales coordinator at Meditech. When my husband Lucas died 4 years ago, I thought I'd experienced the worst grief imaginable. I was wrong. Nothing compares to the gutting realization that your own mother and sister might deliberately terrify your 6-year-old child, and that this cruelty has been quietly simmering all along, waiting for the perfect moment to erupt. Sophie, my daughter, my entire world, is everything I have left of Lucas. She has his stubborn little chin, his endless curiosity, and that laugh that bursts from deep inside her like sunlight breaking through clouds. Most days, keeping her safe and letting her discover the world is enough to keep the grief at bay. Our apartment is small, 2 bedrooms crammed with princess posters, science experiments, and weekend pillow forts, but it's ours. A haven. Our little world. Work keeps the lights on, but it demands sacrifices. Last quarter alone, I spent 18 nights in hotels across the country. Each evening, I FaceTimed Sophie, watching her show me the latest crayon masterpiece or whisper about the babysitter's terrible soup. "When are you coming home, Mommy?" she'd ask, big brown eyes blinking wide, and my chest would collapse and expand all at once. Finding childcare has always been a minefield. Professional services charge astronomical rates for overnight care, and most of my friends are stretched too thin themselves. That's why I relied on my mother, Margaret, and my sister, Vanessa. Margaret raised us in a house where perfection wasn't encouraged, it was mandatory. Vanessa became the golden child, everything polished and expected, while I grew up questioning rules, testing boundaries, and inevitably disappointing my mother. When I married Lucas, her disapproval was obvious but contained behind polite words. "You're throwing away your potential," she said over untouched tea the week before our wedding. And when Lucas died in that car accident on the icy interstate, her condolences were tinged with judgment. "At least now you can focus on a proper career," she remarked at the funeral reception, as if my husband's death were a life course correction. I should have walked away then. But grief makes you vulnerable. Single motherhood makes you practical. So I swallowed my pride and accepted Margaret's occasional help, convincing myself Sophie deserved her grandmother's love, that maintaining family ties, even strained ones, was worth it. Vanessa, 3 years older with her perfect life, inherited Margaret's knack for veiled criticism. Grace and Owen, her children, became benchmarks. Every achievement of theirs a silent reminder of what Sophie lacked. Grace could read chapter books by 5, Vanessa would note casually, and Owen never had Sophie's occasional tantrums. I learned to redirect, buffer, protect Sophie where I could, but last week all that collapsed. It was a sales summit in Dallas, 3 days that could make or break my promotion prospects. I had exhausted every child care option before calling Margaret. Her sigh was audible even over the phone. "Someone has to watch her while you climb the corporate ladder," she said, her words thinly veiled as charity rather than family duty. I ignored the jab. "Thank you, Mom. I really appreciate it." Vanessa added, sweet as poison, that it would be good for Sophie to spend time with her cousins, who knew how to behave in public. The morning I dropped Sophie off, I handed Margaret a folder with exhaustive instructions: food, routines, medications, allergies. "Sophie has a shellfish allergy," I reminded her, tapping the red highlighted section. Medication for hives was included. Margaret waved me off. "We raise children without instruction manuals," she said. Vanessa echoed her. "Exposure builds immunity. Grace and Owen eat everything without complaint." I bit my tongue, swallowing a warning against arguing about pediatric advice versus 1970s parenting. "Just follow the instructions, please." Sophie clung to my leg as I prepared to leave. Kneeling, I promised her 3 days. "I'll call every night, and we'll have our special ice cream date when I get back." Her tiny voice wavered. "Promise?" I nodded. "Promise." She looked solemnly at Grandma and the cousins. "Be good and have fun." As I drove away, her hand pressed against the window. I felt a twist in my stomach, a mother's instinct whispering that something wasn't right. I pushed the feeling down, telling myself it was just worry. But deep down, I knew this wasn't ordinary mischief. By the second day of the summit, I felt the familiar pulse of success. My presentation on Meditech's new cardiac monitoring system had gone flawlessly. Hospital networks were calling, interest was high, and my manager even offered to cover an earlier flight home. I didn't hesitate. Sophie deserved more than 3 days apart, and the thought of surprising her was irresistible. I booked the last flight that evening, my heart pounding with anticipation. Landing just after midnight, I barely slept, imagining her tiny face lighting up when she saw me. By mid-afternoon, I was on the 40-minute drive to my mother's suburban home. The phone was silent, calls unanswered, voicemails left. I assumed they'd want the surprise anyway. But when I opened the front door, reality hit harder than anything I could have prepared for. Sophie was crying, not the soft, frustrated whimpers of a tired child, but deep, ragged sobs that shook her small body. 2 police officers stood awkwardly near the fireplace, expressions tight with unease. Margaret sat upright in her wingback chair, stiff as a board. Vanessa leaned against the wall, arms folded, perfectly composed, but I could see the smirk of self-righteousness lingering on her face. "Clara," my mother said, a flicker of surprise crossing her features. "We weren't expecting you until tomorrow." Sophie bolted into my arms. Her grip was fierce, desperate. "Mommy! Mommy!" I gathered her against me, heart hammering. "What's going on? Why are the police here? Why is my daughter terrified?" Officer Daniels, the taller of the two, stepped forward. "Ma'am, we were called regarding a child being disruptive. Are you her mother?" "Yes," I said sharply. "Clara Bennett." "Who called you?" Vanessa's voice was icy. "We had no choice." Sophie was completely out of control. She refused to eat, threw a tantrum, even broke one of Grandma's collectibles. Nothing we did could calm her down. Margaret added, her tone sharp and clipped. "Children need to understand consequences." Sophie trembled in my arms, burying her face into my shoulder. That's when I saw it, bright, angry welts across her arms and neck. Red and raised. My stomach sank. "She's having an allergic reaction," I said, voice tight. "I told you about the shellfish." Officer Reyes crouched slightly to meet Sophie's eye. "Sweetheart, is this true?" Sophie whispered, barely audible. "I told them not to give me shrimp, but they said I was just picky. Aunt Vanessa said Grace eats everything, and Grandma said I couldn't leave the table until I finished my plate." I felt fury rising like a storm. My hand shook as I brushed Sophie's hair from her face. When she added, "They said the police would put me in handcuffs if I didn't stop crying," my chest went cold. Officer Daniels' expression hardened. "Ma'am, is that true?" Vanessa faltered. "I may have said something, but only to get her attention." Rhea's voice was calm but firm. "This is not appropriate. We do not frighten children into obedience." I drew a slow, steadying breath. Kissing the top of Sophie's head, I felt clarity cutting through the fog of anger and shock. "This ends now," I said, voice low but unwavering. "Sophie and I are leaving." Margaret sprang up. "Don't be dramatic. Children need discipline. You've always been too soft." I turned to Vanessa, meeting her gaze. "No. I'm walking toward protecting mine." Sophie clutched my hand, trembling, and together we walked past the officers and out the front door, leaving Margaret and Vanessa behind. I buckled Sophie into her booster seat, noting the hives along her neck. "Are you mad at me, Mommy?" she whispered. "No, sweetheart," I said, voice steady but firm. "I'm mad at them. You did everything right. You're safe now. I promise." As I drove, I realized something essential. I wasn't just saving her from this moment. I was breaking a cycle that had haunted me since childhood. The cycle of fear, manipulation, and control masquerading as family loyalty. By the time we reached our apartment, Sophie was asleep. I carried her to her bed, checking each red welt, kissing every angry patch as if my love could erase the fear. That night, I sat by the window watching the city lights flicker, realizing the line had finally been drawn. I called my supervisor the next morning. "I need 2 personal days," I said, steady. "Urgent family business." He didn't hesitate. Take what you need, Clara. You've earned it. Then I made the call that mattered most. A family therapist specializing in children who've experienced trauma. Sophie needed support beyond me, someone neutral, trained, and capable. I didn't answer Margaret or Vanessa's frantic calls immediately. When I eventually listened, their voices ranged from clipped irritation to soft pleading. You overreacted. Perhaps we mishandled things. Let's talk like adults. I smiled bitterly. One mistake. No. This was a lifetime of neglect and manipulation, culminating in a 6-year-old being terrified her own mother would be called away. I didn't respond. I called an attorney instead, setting boundaries, legal protections, and visitation rules that ensured Sophie's safety, no matter what Margaret or Vanessa thought. That night, as Sophie colored at the kitchen table, she paused and looked up. Mommy, are we ever going back to Grandma's? Not for a long time, I said gently. And if we do, it will be very different. You'll always be safe. She nodded and returned to her drawing, trusting me completely. And in that quiet moment I knew choosing her over family wasn't betrayal. It was the purest act of loyalty I could offer to my daughter, to myself, and to the little girl I used to be who had nobody to stand up for her. In the days that followed, the world felt sharper, brighter, freer. The tension that had weighed on me for decades, the unspoken judgments, the constant tests of obedience was gone. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was choosing my life on my terms, and Sophie's laughter became the soundtrack of my rebellion. Margaret and Vanessa called, texted, emailed. I ignored the first few attempts. But curiosity and the natural pull of family made me listen eventually. Margaret's tone wavered with genuine concern, though wrapped in ego. Perhaps we overstepped. Let's talk. Vanessa's was hesitant, defensive, softer than I'd ever heard. We just wanted to help. Maybe we were wrong. I didn't rush to forgive. Forgiveness wasn't the point. This wasn't about absolution, it was about accountability. I had already drawn the line, and for the first time, it was clear they had to meet me there if they wanted any place in Sophie's life. The first small victory came weeks later, unceremoniously. Margaret called to say she bought allergy-friendly cookies for Sophie. Just that. No fanfare. No lectures. When I brought them home, Sophie's face lit up with cautious joy. The first flicker of belief that someone was finally listening to her. Vanessa followed suit eventually, her apology reluctant, but genuine enough that I allowed her to sit at the edges of our lives again, under my rules. Every small act of acknowledgement was a step toward healing, but the real transformation happened inside me. I stopped shrinking to fit the version of family they preferred. I stopped apologizing for asserting boundaries. Sophie thrived in the newfound safety, and with each bedtime, each quiet cuddle, I realized something fundamental. The best revenge is never about making someone else hurt. It's about making yourself impossible to ignore, untouchable by their manipulations. We rebuilt our lives. Weekends became our sanctuaries of joy. Pillow forts, kitchen experiments, parks, and science museums. Sophie's laughter filled the apartment in ways it never had before. I posted photos of our little adventures, not to provoke Margaret or Vanessa, but to celebrate the life we were claiming for ourselves. And then came the breakthrough. One evening, after tucking Sophie into bed, she whispered, "Why did Grandma and Aunt Vanessa want to make me sick?" I held her hand, knelt beside her, and chose my words carefully. "They didn't want to hurt you, love. Sometimes adults forget that children know their own bodies best. They made mistakes, but now we know better and you're safe." Her drowsy eyes blinked up at me. "Even grown-ups make mistakes?" "Especially grown-ups," I said softly. "The important part is whether they learn from them." Sophie nestled into her pillow and I sat there watching her drift to sleep. That night tears came not of fear or grief but of release. I cried for Lucas, for the little girl I used to be who had never had anyone to stand up for her, and for Sophie, who would never have to endure the same betrayal. A week later, I met Margaret at a cafe, with Sophie safely at a friend's house. Margaret looked older, more fragile. The steel in her eyes softened but still present. She began predictably, "Clara, you've taken this too far. Children test boundaries. Vanessa and I were just trying to help." I shook my head. Help? By putting Sophie at risk? By calling the police when she panicked? That wasn't discipline. That was abuse. And if you want any relationship with Sophie, it will be on my terms. Margaret blinked, stunned. For the first time I could see real comprehension and fear. Perhaps she realized the power had shifted. First, I continued, you apologize to Sophie directly. Second, you educate yourself about allergies with a professional. Third, you commit to therapy and family sessions. Otherwise, no visits. Not now. Not ever. The words landed, heavy and immovable. Silence followed. Weeks of resistance melted into reluctant compliance. Margaret apologized. Vanessa followed, humbled by her husband's support. It wasn't perfect, it may never be, but it was enough. That night, as I tucked Sophie into bed again, she murmured, "Thank you for coming back early, Mommy. Always love."